Thrillville, Thrillville. Let's go ahead and ask ourselves a quick little question. Let's ask ourselves what we think when we hear these letters spelled out in this order, followed by the name they spell, all in this particular rhythm. Now, most of you watching this video likely won't think much of this, or you maybe might just think of one of the couple of Thrillville gameplay videos I made a few months ago, and that's a real shame. And it's not a shame because of any of you, I want to make that clear. It's not your fault you haven't heard of this game, and to be honest, I don't know whose fault it is. But what I do know is that it's a travesty that hardly anybody has ever heard of this game, because when I hear those letters, I instantly think of this almost magical world of theme parks filled with roller coasters, minigames, and endless fun. Thrillville and its sequel, Thrillville Off the Rails, are the best games you've never heard of. And over the next however many minutes this video ends up being, I'm going to tell you exactly what you've been missing out on for about 15 years. And I'll also tell you how you can change that. But before I can tell you what makes Thrillville so great, I feel the need to tell you what I think makes a game great in the first place, and there's a few factors that I believe contribute to this. So let's get the first one out of the way. The game needs to be fun. Seems like a simple concept, right? I mean, in the year 2022, you'd think game companies would have a grasp on the idea that the game they're making needs to be fun. And to be fair, a lot of them understand this. Just a quick look at games like Splitgate, Worms, Gang Beasts, or pretty much any other big title made by indie developers will tell you that there's still plenty of studios that realize how important fun is in a video game. However, it's no secret that AAA games made by larger corporations have been seriously lacking in this department for around a decade now, if not longer. Grand Theft Auto Online is one of the most obvious suspects in this regard if you look at the usually lackluster updates that it's received for years up until recently, with each one adding in unrealistic vehicles, more levels of grind, and plenty of other fun-killing bullshit that forces you to spend real-world money just to stand a chance against everybody else. Then there's the WWE game series, which, apart from 2K19, hasn't had a really fun installment since 2K14, and the only reason that game was good is because it was the last one to be developed by THQ before they went bankrupt. And who could forget about Call of Duty, another franchise that's garnered a bad reputation because it hasn't had a good title since Black Ops 2, with the exception of Modern Warfare 2019 and maybe the new Modern Warfare 2 as well. So what's the difference between games like Splitgate, Worms, and Gang Beasts, and GTA, WWE, and COD? Well, technically I already said it, but I'll say it again. Splitgate, Worms, and Gang Beasts, they were all made by more indie developers who care more about their art than their wallets, while GTA, WWE, and COD are products of corporations. Now, I'm not trying to sound like a hippie saying that corporations are bad, but what I will say is that the correlation is there and it can't be ignored. Also, I want to point out that I recognize that the people developing these AAA games do care about what they're putting out. They wouldn't be developers if they didn't have a passion for it. But the people in these large corporations that make the decisions base their decisions solely on revenue generation. And you know what generates revenue the best? Graphics. Now, as much as I've been shitting on these AAA games for the past few minutes, I have to give them credit in some regard, and that's in the visual category. Grand Theft Auto 5, while it may not look quite as great as Red Dead Redemption 2, it still holds up 9 years after the initial release. Jesus, 9 years. Granted, there have been some visual updates as it's floated across each console generation, but even on the PS3 and Xbox 360, it still looks real similar to real life. Switching gears to WWE 2K22, this game's graphics are absolutely incredible. You can tell a lot of work went into them, and that the year and a half that 2K took off to focus on the game wasn't wasted. And Call of Duty has just always looked like a real-life battlefield regardless of which game you were playing. But the thing is, as great as these games look, they only look that way so that we, the players, will want to buy their games when we watch the trailers. After that, we're stuck playing a $60 piece of dog shit that makes you feel like an idiot for being tricked by the succubus. Compare that to something like Gang Beasts. Does this game look good? No. Does it need to? No. Will it bring you some of the most fun you'll have with a group of friends for hours at a time? Absolutely. Now, that's not to say games can't look good and be fun at the same time, because Splitgate and Worms break that mold easily. But the point of this long-ass tangent is that, contrary to some beliefs, games do not need to look better than real life to be fun. They need to be fun to be fun. And Thrillville encapsulates this mantra so incredibly well. Thrillville is a game where you build and manage your own theme park. and the goal in each park is just to complete enough missions to unlock the next park. These missions can be anything from building a new roller coaster to getting the high score in a mini game to simply talking to park guests. It's pretty simple, sure, and it's nothing special in the looks department, but it's a game that absolutely prioritizes fun, and they took this ideology so seriously that they set out to make everything a game. Talking to people is a game, training your staff is a game, and, of course, playing mini-games is a game. Now you'd think that with all these games, it might get a bit repetitive, but it really doesn't because most of these 50 mini-games are different from each other and represent entirely different video game genres. For example, as far as sports games go, there's mini golf and saucer soccer. For racing, there's auto sprint and go-karts. Want a rhythm game? Try Entertainer. Want a beat 'em up? Play Bandito Chinchilla. A platformer? Sparkle Island is for you. The list goes on from there, but what's even more impressive than the number of individual games the developers added into Thrillville is the fact that despite the vastly different types of mini-games they included, they're all made relatively well at worst and could probably survive as standalone indie games at best. And most importantly, they're all fun. Let me tell you about a few of my favorite minigames. Probably the best one in my opinion is Bandito Chinchilla, which, like I said, is a good old-fashioned beat-em-up. Now this game's plot is pretty simple. This rich guy kidnapped Bandito's sister for some reason, and aggressively hopped away from him, which leaves either Bandito Chinchilla or one of his mask-wearing hermanos, depending on who you select, to battle his goons through the streets of Mexico in an effort to save your sister. And by the end of it, yeah, you beat this dude called Zero Bamba in an unsanctioned boxing match. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, the ending of this game is pretty weird, but apparently there's actually a continuation of the story in a DLC that I never knew existed until recently. So luckily for you, I can't spoil that part of the game yet. And we'll also talk slightly more about the DLC later on. But while this game lacks quite a bit in its story, it makes up for it greatly in the simple yet challenging combat. So you've basically got your two main attacks, light strikes and heavy strikes, and I'm sure you can figure out their dynamic with that information alone. You can also jump, and even do light or heavy strikes during a jump. Then there's dashing, which lets you quickly run across the screen, but you can also press one of the strike buttons to send your opponents flying. And lastly, there's the special move, which is different depending on which character you're playing as and can only be triggered once your power meter is full enough. Then, like I said, you have to battle enemies through the streets of Mexico, but as you progress further in the game, you start to encounter some stronger foes that sometimes require you to adapt your strategy to overcome. Starting off at the bottom of the food chain, we have the El Prairie Dogs, who can be taken out with one combo if you're playing on easy. Oh, and by the way, every enemy's name starts with L. Later on to the first level, you'll start to encounter L Lizards and even an L Tortoise, before you finally face off against the first boss, Vico's Bodyguard. He's not too difficult to take out at this stage, and you can usually just spam special moves until he's dead if you've been saving him like I, a veteran player, usually do. But I'm not going to go too much further in depth with the enemies because I think you mostly get the gist by this point, but I will say there's also creatures like L Toad that you have to be more strategic about facing off against due to his insane hops and devastating attacks that will take away half your health. One other game I love is called Vendor Tender, and the only genre I can think of to classify this as is whatever Peggle is, because of the whole shooting objects of the board mechanic. But Vendor Tender is another really simple game that's tons of fun. Your objective is just to clear the board of all its contents by shooting items at what's already there. And if you can connect at least 3 like items together, they'll turn into gold coins, at which point if you shoot those coins with another coin, you'll clear them. Rinse and repeat for 10 increasingly difficult levels, and as long as the items on the board don't cross the red line at the bottom, and you don't run out of time, you win. Now, as simple as this concept may sound, I can assure you it's very fun to play, and I even occasionally find myself hopping on Thrillville every once in a while just to play a few rounds of it. And one last game I'll talk about before moving on is called Saucer Sumo. Now, in this game, you play as a little alien UFO saucer that hovers above the stage, and your goal is to knock the other players off. As the game goes on, power-ups will occasionally drop onto the stage that can either give your saucer increased traction, make him into a tank, trap all other players in ice, or trap you in ice. There's also these little bumpers that'll appear from the ground every now and then that can be devastating if you run into one, just to add a bit more to the chaos and unpredictability. There's also 2 different modes for this match, points and lives, and they're exactly how they sound. Points mode is simply based on scoring knockouts and attaining kill streaks, where the player with the most points after 90 seconds wins. Lives mode, on the other hand, is a lot more exciting because everybody has 7 lives, and if you get knocked off the stage, you lose 1, and the last player standing wins. Now, I will admit that this game gets boring pretty quickly if you play against bots, but when you're playing this against your friends, it can be fun as hell. Oh, and that reminds me, this game has multiplayer. Local multiplayer on most versions, but multiplayer nonetheless. And while a lot of fun can be had just playing on your own, I think we all know that playing games like these with your friends is always so much more exciting. And if you stick around until later, I'll tell you how you can actually play this game and many other local multiplayer games online. But for now, let's shift our focus over towards the rest of the game. I've talked quite a bit about how fun the mini games are, but what about the game itself? Don't worry, Thrillville as a whole is still a very enjoyable experience. And while its core has to do with building roller coasters with good stats and managing your theme park, it rarely ever feels tedious or boring. As far as the coaster building goes, I've never really cared for this aspect of the game too much, but it's always cool to experiment with new creative designs, depending on which park I'm building in and what type of coaster I'm putting together. Additionally, Thrillville Off the Rails includes a coaster building feature called Whoa pieces, which are basically cartoonish and exciting pieces that add things like rings of fire, TNT barrels, and even AI-controlled cranes that pick up passenger-filled cars off of one track and place them onto another. And also in Off the Rails, since finishing roller coasters was so much of a hassle for people like me in the first game, and since track assist AI is worse than GTA 3's, the developers added the ability to leave a coaster track unfinished and still run it, thus forcing your coasters to go off the rails. Do you get it? Off the rail. Yeah, I don't get it either. The roller coasters don't even crash in my park guests afterwards. Worst game ever. Anyway, at this point, the only things I haven't really talked about are the missions, training your staff, or talking to guests. Now, the missions are pretty self-explanatory in the sense that you just look at what it tells you to do and do it. Most of these are just passive things that you'll do without even knowing they exist, so considering you can just do your own thing and not have to worry about them, I don't see much point in talking about them any further. Staff training, meanwhile, can get a bit tedious if you hire several staff members for each position, as you're forced to play these specific mini-games without much variety. But again, it's not 100% necessary to train them since they can figure out how to do their jobs on their own after a while, and you won't really notice any difference regardless. So again, we're gonna move on. Talking to your guests, though, is a different story. Now technically, you don't really have to talk to your guests to progress either, but the difference is that doing so is actually kind of fun to do sometimes. Being able to talk to and become friends with your guests helps immerse you a bit into the game and allows you to feel like you're actually your character talking to other people in this park, even if the dialogue is pretty robotic and unrealistic. But it can be a great change of pace every once in a while after playing the minigames or doing other things to manage your park for so long, and just hanging out with other people in your park can genuinely make you feel less alone in the single player experience. But speaking of immersion, I think you understand my point of Thrillville being a generally fun game by now. So let's go ahead and move on to the next factor that I believe works towards making a game great, and that's the game's setting. Ever since they were created, video games have continued to look better and better with each passing year. Wrestling games 20 years ago used to look like this, but thanks to improvements in hardware, technology, and graphic design, they've evolved to look like this. Grand Theft Auto 20 years ago used to look like this, but now it looks like this. And Call of Duty 20 years ago used to look like this, and today it looks like this. And there are plenty of other examples, but based on these three alone, it's safe to say that as time goes on, video games almost always improve their graphics to a point where it can be hard to tell the difference between them and reality. However, as I alluded earlier, it's not the graphics that make the game, it's the game that makes the game. While all three of these franchises' latest installments undoubtedly look beautiful, a lot of the time I just can't help but choose to play their predecessors over them because of how much fun their earlier titles usually are. But we've already talked about fun in video games enough, so let me tell you one other major factor that helped me determine which old games to play: the setting. Settings are very important in any form of media because they can help set the stage for the story you want to tell, and they can also help keep your audience interested in your artwork, and the genre of video games is no exception to this. In my opinion, a game setting can be almost, if not just as important as its level of fun. If you disagree with this, let me give you a hypothetical scenario. Let's say you have the choice to play one of two games for the rest of your life, GTA 3 or GTA Vice City. And before you give your answer, let me give you some background. Both of these games run on the same engine, they both have the same control scheme, and they both play exactly the same. Vice City has some minor improvements over 3 and it has a much better story, but if you take these out, Vice City is basically just a clone of 3. So with all this in mind, which do you choose? Would you choose the gray, foggy, and depressing GTA 3, or would you pick the more colorful, vibrant, and 80s themed Vice City? Seeing as how I can't actually hear your answer, I'm just going to assume you picked Vice City because it just looks like a much better game to play despite being very similar to its predecessor. And do you see why that is? Now, I want to reiterate that I don't believe that a boring game with good graphics is better than a fun game with crappy graphics, because I feel that the point I'm currently trying to make may seem like it contradicts with this statement. I want to assure you that I'm solely talking about settings as opposed to graphics right now because there's a stark difference between these two topics despite their similarities. There's a difference between talking about Vice City's colorful setting and its crappy early 2000s graphics. If we were talking about graphics right now, GTA 5 would be the game we're talking about right now, because it objectively looks millions of times better than Vice City. But when we're talking about settings, Vice City actually gives 5 a good challenge. But how does this all translate back to Thrillville? It's simple. Just take a look at these worlds that you see before you. Take a look at these theme parks that you're given the ability to freely roam around in without a care in the world. Look at the park's guests walking around with hats and balloons, talking to each other, laughing, standing around, running to rides, and waiting in line. Look at that roller coaster speeding down the track you just built and crashing because you didn't finish it because you'll do it later. Or if it's too boring to watch other people have fun on your coaster, ride it yourself and find out how it would feel to ride your own roller coaster in real life. Run around from park to park and explore the different magical decorations that each one has on display, and just let yourself escape into this immersive world where problems don't exist and you don't feel yourself getting older because the sun never sets. Alright, before I fall too far into my escapism fantasy, let's talk for a minute about the various theme parks in Thrillville. I'm not going to go too in depth with them, seeing as how there's 5 parks in each game with 3 sub-parks in every park to create a total of 30 different parks, so just like with the minigames, let's focus on a select few. I'm going to start with the weaker of the 3 parks I'll be talking about, and that's Pirateville. And me calling this one weak isn't meant to be an insult to the park or anything, just that it takes the bronze medal for level design out of all the other parks in the game, which is an impressive feat considering it came from the first game, which is considerably grayer and features less appealing parks compared to the sequel, but I digress. Pirateville is exactly as it sounds, a pirate-themed park. It's got some pretty cool details, most notably being the gigantic pirate ship at its epicenter, which is really cool to glance at when you're riding by it on a coaster or just passing through the park. As for the rest of the park, it's filled up with tall palm trees and some early 1700s Caribbean-inspired buildings to give you a sense of being in a market town during the time pirates were roaming the seas. Plus, one more cool detail about this park is that it has a tunnel in this giant rock that you can build a roller coaster track through so that you can ride a coaster through there. Oh, and one more thing Thrillville likes to do is theme certain rides and even minigames around one of the sub-parks that you'll be building up. So for Pirateville, they included a pirate-themed version of their first-person shooter game, Shoot Zone, which I think is probably my favorite version of the game just because of its setting alone. Moving on over to Off the Rails, we have one of the final sub-parks that you get to help build, and that's Sunnyville, which is a park simply based on the summertime. Sunnyville is part of the larger Thrillville holiday park that also features Frightville, a fall/Halloween themed park, and Frostyville, a winter-based park, each of which complement Sunnyville superbly. In this park, the main walkways are colored to look like you're walking across sand, while all the attractions areas are designed as beach water, all to give you that vibe of a beach party. This park also has some palm trees in the background, as well as some beach umbrellas, sand castles, surfers, lifeguards, and bodybuilders. Plus they have these awesome looking animatronic sharks that spin around and look like they're peeking out of the water, as well as the sun looking down at everyone through his sunglasses. And if you're someone like me who loves GTA Vice City, there's also these buildings on one end of the park that mimic Miami's famous Ocean Drive, complete with a lowrider and a yacht parked right in front of them. All of these decorations help sell the idea that no matter what the weather might look like outside your house, it's a hot and sunny summer day at this theme park you're hanging out in. And that's a feeling that takes me back to those times when I would go to Cedar Point with my family and just have fun riding roller coasters with them all day. The last of these parks that I want to talk about is called Usagiville, and this is a very unique park compared to all the rest. Remember how I said that there are some minigames based on theme parks like Pirateville? Well, Usagiville is the one and only park in either game that's based on minigames, those being Sparkle Quest and Sparkle Island. Both of these games are anime-themed platformers that feature an antagonist called Usagi, as well as plenty of other cute kawaii-style enemies, which all make up most of the background in this park. And what's even better is that just about all of them are animated. Out of all the parks in both games, this one feels the most alive to me, just because of the sheer amount of things moving around, be it the enemies from the game, the waterfalls, or even these dancing flowers. Now, I'm not usually one to partake in these kinds of styles, but the colorful landscape combined with just everything going on makes this one of my absolute favorite theme parks in all of Thrillville, and it's one of those places I hate that I have to leave in order to progress through the rest of the game. But that's okay, because even though I have to wake up from this dream world, and even though I have to eventually move on from Pirateville and Sunnyville too, there's one thing that will follow me to whichever park I choose to travel to next, and that thing is the next factor that we're going to be talking about. If you were just minding your business in complete silence, and then you suddenly heard L7's Pretend We're Dead, would you instantly start thinking of performing drive-bys in GTA San Andreas? Or if Riot by 3 Days Grace randomly came on, perhaps you'd instantly remember Chris Masters avoiding a double chair shot in SmackDown vs. Raw 2007's career mode. Wait, no, I've got it. If you heard Freebird right now, I almost guarantee you'll get a PTSD flashback of trying to survive playing it on Guitar Hero 2. Music is a powerful tool that people often seem to underestimate. I've heard stories of old people with dementia who, upon hearing a song from their younger years, will be able to get up and start dancing to it like they were 50 years younger. Now, as far-fetched as stories like those might sound, if you just got taken back to a vivid memory of playing on your PS2 from one of the songs I just listed, then a story like this may have some truth to it. A video game soundtrack or score is another very important feature that needs to be implemented well in order for your game to be considered great, because this is what sets the mood that you want your player to be in while playing your game. I mean, imagine playing something like the Walking Dead game, and instead of hearing this as Lee's talking to Clementine, you hear this.
I called him a crybaby. Hid the bug in his pillow.
Alright, this may be a pretty extreme example, so let me dial it back to something more subtle. Let's go back to Vice City for a moment, and let's imagine this game never had songs like Billie Jean, The Message, Working for the Weekend, or really any other song that was popular back in the 80s. Imagine all you had was some classical Beethoven crap to listen to as you're partying on Colonel Cortez's yacht. That would really kill the mood, wouldn't it? Of course, the game would still be fun to screw around on, and you'd still get that vibe that you're in 80s Miami just by hanging around the strip, but this game wouldn't be nearly as iconic without its soundtrack. Hell, all you need to do to find out how important these songs are to the game is look at the fuss everyone threw about Billie Jean being taken out in last year's remaster to see how much these songs really mean to the players. As critical as a game's level of fun is, and as important as its setting is, it's imperative that the soundtrack does a great job of complementing these, or else the game just won't feel right. But if you haven't guessed yet, this is another nail that Thrillville hits right on the head. In addition to its amazing roster of minigames and theme parks, both Thrillville games have incredible soundtracks that just bring everything together. In most of the minigames, Thrillville uses these funky techno songs that can do a great job setting the mood a lot of the time. These songs don't need to be anything special, they're just there to provide some good background noise while you sit there playing the game. But in addition to these, there's a plethora of licensed songs that not only provide that mid-2000s vibe, but they also help immerse you even further into this world by playing music that you'd likely hear if you were walking through an amusement park during this time. I'm not going to talk about the first Thrillville soundtrack here because it doesn't really have as much to offer in my opinion, but Off the Rails' soundtrack hits different. You've got songs like Forever by the Veronicas, Heels Over Head by Boys Like Girls, Yellow Card's Ocean Avenue, and even two songs by Miley Cyrus called Good and Broken and East Northumberland High. Hey, don't you dare talk shit about me enjoying Miley Cyrus songs. These were from her Hannah Montana days, and she made some good fucking music back then, so I don't want to hear it, okay? But if these aren't enough for you, there's also some other original songs in this game that help sell the idea that you're in a mid-2000s theme park. Songs like Whiplash, Emo Skeeter Girl, Go for a Ride, and Perfect Day are all songs that you can listen to in this game that will make you want to waste the day playing Thrillville until night comes. And honestly, that doesn't sound like a day wasted to me. Thrillville and Thrillville Off the Rails are games about building and managing a theme park at their core, but in reality, there's so much more than that. These games are not only games, but they're a collection of mini-games. They're an escape to a world where everything is okay. They're a time machine that will bring you back to a simpler time. They're an unparalleled experience that I don't think can ever be replicated. And most importantly, they're the greatest games you've never heard of. They're a pair of games that took a few key factors that should be considered when making any type of video game, and they ran with them to create something that no other game has come close to being able to recreate for me. And they did that by taking an appealing setting, a complimentary soundtrack, and an unmatched level of fun, and putting them together to craft an ultimate experience that I'll likely never get again. By now, you should be able to tell that Thrillville is a game that holds a very special place in my heart. This is a game that I grew up playing with my brother many years ago, and it's a game that I find myself continually coming back to years later. Of course, part of this is due to nostalgia, but mostly it's because this is a genuinely good game that's somehow gone almost entirely unnoticed. I grew up thinking this was one of the most popular games in the mid-2000s, being up there with other games like Guitar Hero and Tony Hawk's Underground, but over the past couple of years, I've realized that there's only a handful of people I've met outside my family who have even heard of this game, let alone played it, and that's a goddamn crime. And that's why I decided to write this video essay, to tell people who follow my channel and anybody else who may stumble upon this video about the best video game you've never heard of, and hopefully this allows more people to get the experience of playing it. And speaking of which, if you think you might want to give Thrillville a shot, there's a few ways you can play it. The first Thrillville game was only available on the original Xbox, the PS2, and the PSP, but if you don't have any of these consoles, you can always install an emulator like PCSX2 or Zemu, at least I hope I'm pronouncing that right, and play it on one of those. Or if you don't have a computer or emulation just isn't your strong suit, as luck would have it, Microsoft recently made both Thrillville games backwards compatible on the Xbox One and Xbox Series X and S. As for Thrillville Off the Rails, it's also available on the PS2 and PSP, but it can also be played on the Wii, Nintendo DS, Xbox 360, and even Windows. Plus, it's also now available on the Xbox One and Series X and S through the backwards compatibility program. A couple of other things I want to note is that Off the Rails' DLC pack I talked about earlier is only available on the 360 version of the game, which can also be played on the One or Series X and S. Now, unfortunately, as far as I can tell, neither of these games have any sort of online multiplayer, but that doesn't mean you can't play with your friends. Luckily, they both have local multiplayer, so if you choose to emulate either of them on your PC, or if you buy Off the Rails on Steam, then you can play these games online with your friends by installing an application called Parsec. This will let you play any local multiplayer game with your friends online, not just Thrillville. And if you need help figuring it out, I'd suggest searching up a tutorial on YouTube. I'd show you how to use it here, but this video is already long enough as it is, and I'd probably do a bad job explaining it anyways. But don't worry, from what I remember, it's very easy to figure out anyway. Also, I do want to say that before anybody suggests Roller Coaster Tycoon or Planet Coaster to me as a continuation of Thrillville, trust me, I've already considered it and I decided against it. While these are both roller coaster building games where you also get to build and manage your own theme park, and while both of these were also developed by Frontier Developments, neither of these games scratches that same itch as Thrillville. It's nothing against RCT or Planet Coaster, they both seem like incredibly well fleshed out games with their superior coaster design mechanics and more highly developed park management systems. But Thrillville's appeal to me has to do with so much more than these. Like I said, Thrillville lets me escape to a place where I can physically walk around my theme park, talk to my guests, and just be part of the world. But RCT and Planet Coaster only allows you to watch everybody else have fun from a camera in the sky. Plus, neither of these games feature any of the minigames I've come to know and love in Thrillville, so it just really isn't the same for me at all. Alright, so I've spent the past however many minutes talking to you guys about why I think Thrillville is one of the greatest games that never got the recognition it deserved, mostly because of its impeccable soundtrack, its immersive setting, and its incredibly fun game design. And I've also done my best to back up my claims by talking about how other games like GTA and WWE have been able to master these factors in the past to keep people like me coming back to them all these years later. But now, I would genuinely love to hear your guys' opinions. Have you ever heard of Thrillville before watching this video? And if you have, did I do it justice? Or if you haven't, do you regret not knowing about it? Will you seek out this game in the future and give it a try for yourself? What other games do you know about that not many others do? And do those games deserve a larger spotlight like Thrillville? Please let me know down below. Alright, now then, that's another video essay done. All the way back in November of 2021 when I wrote that GTA 3 Remastered video essay, I told you guys that if I got a fair few amount of likes, I'd probably make another one, that there was another PS2 game I wanted to talk about. Well, it only took me 11 months, but I finally got it done. And I say that as I'm reading the script, but really I only finished the script 11 months after that video dropped. In reality, it's been about another 3 or 4 months since I actually finished the script, so we can go ahead and add that on, make it about 14, 15 months. And I would have finished recording this script a lot sooner, but things like not having the time to sit down and record this, as well as not really having the space to sit down and record this, as well as being sick whenever I would have the time and or space to sit down and fucking record this, well, let's just say it all added up and I had to postpone things by, well, I guess 3 or 4 months, like I said. But I also could have completed this a lot sooner if I didn't end up rewriting the script like 5 or 6 times over the past half a year, because I desperately wanted to do Thrillville the justice it deserves for being one of my favorite video games of all time. At this point, though, I'm pretty confident that this video wasn't perfect, but I've come to terms with the fact that it does not need to be. After all, I'm just a tiny little YouTuber sharing my obscure opinion on a game nobody knows exists, and if I keep holding myself to the standards of producing videos on the level of 24 frames wireframes of Nick or LS Mark, for example, when it's just my second video like this, I'll never bring myself to post another video. So I guess that's the moral of this whole story. But more importantly, if I keep holding myself to those standards, then I'll also never get rid of the near terabyte of Thrillville footage I have on my computer. That's right, almost a fucking terabyte. Why so much? Because I recorded myself playing through Off the Rails once, realized I messed something up, went back and recorded it again, and then recorded the original Thrillville on top of all that. All of this over the course of a year. That's right, my earliest recording for this video is from September 15th of 2021. Jesus, I have a fucking problem. Anyway, that's pretty much it for me. I hope I was able to show you guys why I love Thrillville so much, and I just hope I was able to touch on every topic I wanted to go over, but even if I didn't, I could always just take another shot of this down the line. But if you're still on the fence about giving Thrillville a chance, go ahead and watch one of my other videos where me and a group of my friends, who had never heard of Thrillville beforehand, mind you, played a few of my favorite minigames on there. Those videos should be linked somewhere in the upper right corner of the screen right about now, unless you're on a console or a TV or something, that is, in which case you can just go find them on my channel, you worthless scrub. I'm sorry, that was mean. What I meant to say was, if you liked the video and want to see more like this, do me a favor and drop a like. It's very rare that I make videos like this, but if I see enough likes, I'll probably end up making a third one in the future. And if you'd potentially like to see that video, consider subscribing. But I warn you, that one won't be perfect either. But that's fine, because at least I know it's a perfect day in my amusement park. Have a good one, guys.